Welcome, everybody, to Getting Transparent. If you didn't get a chance to catch our last podcast, we were joined by Mark Carter, who's currently the Secretary IAFP and runs his company at MC Squared, and also Manish Gupta, who's the CTO at Tag One. And we talked about the FDA and the traceability challenge and tech traceability and what this is going to mean for the future of the food industry. Really fun discussion. Go check it out at www.gettingtransparent.com or wherever you listen to your podcast. So today we're going to have a great time. We've got one of the most experienced and respected leaders in the food and supplement and CBG and CPG and CBD industries. Karil served on 4 U.S. government industry committees and spoken before Congress, the UN, the FDA, consults for GS1, P&G, Mars, amongst other enterprises, and is a major advocate for CBD. And I'd say the only negative mark that Karil has is she went to Michigan. So go Penn State. We are. And I think we've been owning you guys the last couple of years. So welcome Karil Kochenderfer to the show.
Hey, thank you, Joe. Go Blue.
That's right. It's coming soon. I'm excited. So start us off a little bit. How did you end up in the food industry, and really what drives your passion for pushing for more transparency in the industry?
I think simply I just took an interview. A gentleman by the name of Manley Mopus, he had taken over for the food industry organization here in Washington called the Grocery Manufacturers of America.
Mm-hmm.
Really liked him. I liked his vision for the association. He brought me on to do sustainability issues,
Great.
like recycling and green marketing. And the next thing I know, I've developed a real rapport with the members, and I really enjoyed it. And I became the problem solver, the crisis manager.
Mm-hmm.
And the next thing I knew, the issues that I was doing on sustainability evolved into biotechnology, which just went everywhere. It was played out at the state level, the federal level, international, at FDA, up on Capitol Hill, in the media, consumers, it went everywhere. So everybody got to know Karil K, and that was me. And then those same issues on biotech, because it was so new, was stopping all the supply chains. And so I got into international trade. And then the international trade took me to globalization and understanding standards.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the evolution of my career really was an evolution of trying to understand the industry's problems and difficulties, the new opportunities as well, because when there's newness, there's curiosity and uncertainty. And they always gratefully reached down to me, and we helped to answer these solutions together, both at the trade associations, the Grocery Manufacturers of America, and then ultimately my consultancy and working one-on-one. So it's been a fun journey, a really fun journey.
Have you been encouraged by some of the movement in different companies and enterprises by their commitment to whether it's sustainability or provenance or food safety? Frustrated, and maybe if you're encouraged, what have been some companies that you feel like are really out there and trying to make a difference, and kind of what are some things you're seeing?
I've been encouraged and yet frustrated at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
The CPG industry is a major uses packaging.
Yep.
And consumers rely on that packaging for safe foods, safe, products that are good looking, quality. So packaging plays an important role, and they've made phenomenal commitments towards recycling.
Mm-hmm.
But if you just have recycled material, that's the same thing as having garbage.
That's right.
You have to create a demand for recycled goods.
Yep.
You have to use them in your products. You have to use them in your packaging. And so if you have recycled, you have to create the market for recycled as well. And that's where I've really felt the industry could go far better. It's not just saying that our goods are recycled and can be recycled. It's actually picking up the mantle and saying, we will recycle as well,
right,
and doing more in that area. And then, yes, as a country, as consumers, as an industry, saying that our municipal waste industry, where we could do so much better, is elementary at best. So on just the small issue of recycling, here's one issue that's actually where we could do a lot, and we are just so underperforming. And I'm not even talking about greenhouse gases and climate change and some of those really mind-boggling issues. But I just think if we can tackle some of these small things and really be committed rather than committed to just doing press releases, I think we could do a better job.
Oh, I think so too. And granted, everyone is responsible in some capacity. It takes consumers to be willing to make some small sacrifices. Okay, I can use a paper straw.
Yeah,
It gets soggy. It's not great. It's not as good as a
yeah,
plastic straw, but it's fine, right? It's not that big of a deal. I can bring my own bags into a grocery store. I mean, I love what Aldi does. I'm a big fan of Aldi for lots of reasons. But when I start to walk up to the store, I'm like, here, I know I need to go back to my car and get my bags because they're not going to give me bags.
yeah.
And so, certain policies, I think in California, they eliminated plastic bags, which is a very small sacrifice when you look at what's happening to our oceans. It's not just a matter of inconvenience. And so even beyond recycling, using items, man, we've got the technology to put, a robot on Mars and man on the moon. I think we can find and use items that, don't even need to be recycled, that
Well,
they can.
like you said, I mean, I think people realize, well, if I carry a bag, I don't need the plastic bag. It's relatively small, a small contribution, but it's a contribution.
Minor inconvenience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think people want to do those things and feel good about themselves.
Right.
But I think it also, to the core, to how you and I met, it really takes us back to the whole notion of transparency,
Hmm.
traceability, circularity,
Yeah.
that one action reflects another. And once you begin to understand the relationship here, it's like, wow, we can make a difference if we just do small things and routinize them. And the beautiful thing about the recycling industry, if you go back and think of sustainability, is they found to make recycling easy, quick, and familiar.
Hmm.
And that's really critical as we think about these complex issues related to sustainability and climate change. But even also as we change as we deal with the forthcoming changes that are coming with digital e-commerce and and all the rest.
What do you think holds companies back from increased, yeah, sustainability and transparency initiatives?
I think their own bigness.
Hmm.
I think a lot of the companies that are small and nimble and can hear innovation across the lunch table or across the meeting table, are in a better position to move and capture opportunities, growth, and at least in this environment. I think particularly in the industry, food industry, but also many industries, bigness is not always their best friend,
Yeah.
and they become large organizations, highly siloed. And so the reality is they can't hear all the creative opportunities that other people are doing in their own company.
Hmm.
And so they just kind of sit in siloed organizations. And I think what you're seeing even in the CPG industry is that bigness has had its limits. The movement on clean label, the movement on biotech and organic was really a statement that we can think differently.
Hmm.
And maybe we need to take these large hierarchy organizations and squash them a little bit, hear what other people are saying across these multi-siloed organizations, and be young and innovative again.
Yep.
And so I think that the small companies are really taking a lot of opportunity right now in a way that the big companies wish that they were smaller, leaner, meaner, more agile, because now is the time for the agility and nimbleness.
Certain components of large enterprises has always confounded me a little bit, Carol, where, rather than making key decisions or just moving forward, sometimes I see them like hired outside consultants to tell them what to do so they mitigate risk is always odd for me, but I've basically come from an entrepreneurial background. And as I mentioned before, I've been in Baghdad where you just have to make a decision and you go, determine what the risk is and what the opportunities are and go from there. Um, and so I've always said, and when we look for clients out on tag one, I always look at the company values first, right? What are the company values? Are the company values and culture one that already embraces traceability, already embraces transparency? Great, there's worthy of a conversation. I don't need to go and try to educate and explain that at the C level. So I think when the CEO and the board say this is part of our mission, we're going to be sustainably focused. We're going to offer fair wages. We're going to make sure we're have product provenance, do things the right way, which is a little bit harder, but there's a benefit to that. That seems to fit with what needs to happen in an organization, and yet those who are solely focused on appeasing and profits and purely profitability. But by the way, profits are good. Like you won't be in business for very long if you don't have
Right.
profits. So I
Yeah.
and I even want to come back to that, which is certain companies like Patagonia or Gaia Herbs. I'm sure you've got your list of companies. And I know Nestle has a lot more initiatives. I'm not in Nestle to know how much is real versus how much, like you said, it's PR. But let's give them like the benefit of the doubt that they're investing in biodiverse farms and organic farms, those type of things. What do you see are the benefits? Hey, it's not just an expense, right? If we're going to do sustainability or we're going to do tech traceability for our ingredients, many organizations look at it as like, oh, it's just another system. It's more work. We don't really want to do it. It's change, and change is hard. What would you explain to people who are maybe on the fence or thinking about this? Like, hey, there's actually some real benefits to implementing sustainability or traceability. How do you explain this to somebody?
Um, I think first and foremost, companies are just gobsmacked by the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
60-70% of them have been hit by the pandemic, and they are still reeling from those changes. I mean, we saw more in the e-commerce growth in the last 90 days than we saw for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a quick pivot by companies, large and small, to move online, to grab opportunities and to continue their business. But let's
Mm-hmm.
not fool ourselves. It's still an ongoing adjustment, and the supply chains haven't caught up. But let's go back to the basics. The whole e-commerce revolution evolved because of data, standards, traceability.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about traceability, particularly where you and I sit, it's easy to think, well, it's just food traceability, and it comes because FDA is forcing us to do it. No, if I get back to those multi-siloed corporations that we were talking about before,
Mm-hmm.
you've got your supply chain logistics people that are doing it just to move the product out the door. And they're also doing it to get better, premier customer relationships with their suppliers.
Mm-hmm.
Then you've got the corporate lawyer who's doing it just to get risk reduction and to get risk out of the corporate model.
Yep.
Then you've got the government relations people who are doing it for, FDA and other government agencies. But then you've got the people who are doing it in the marketing side,
Yep.
who are trying to capture the environmental, the fair trade, the gluten-free, to isolate, trace, and capture the value of better products for consumers. What I'm trying to say here is there is a hierarchy of traceability models. Some have very real costs. If the government forces you to do it, you don't want to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
If your insurance company forces you to do it, you don't want to do it, but you still have to do it. But there's also profit margins to be had.
Right.
My approach has always been to say, seize the profit, put the model in place, do the digital analytics, enhance your consumer sales, develop those premier supplier relationships, and put the system in for those, and you'll address those costs that others require. And that gets back to having a corporation that can think across the silos.
Yep.
And realize that each department is doing the same things for different reasons.
That's right.
And we could do it more efficiently.
Yep.
So once businesses realize that they can do it to get, a 3 to 5% profit margin because more consumers want gluten-free or organic
Mm-hmm.
or made in America, if they pay for that, the system gets put in place, and that system covers all the other demands that other departments put on it. And I think that's one of the first messages. I think the second message is, let's be honest, everybody wants to be part of the e-commerce digital revolution.
Yep.
We've got to figure out what's the on-ramp looks like. I would imagine a lot of companies, particularly if their profits have been hit by the pandemic, they know that the people are coming out of the pandemic because of e-commerce. They know they want to do more of it. But they also know that it's expensive, putting in IT systems, overhauling legacy systems. And so one of the things I think the industry could do better is understand what good looks like, what better looks like,
Mm-hmm.
and what really is better looks like.
That's right.
If you're a small business, if you know that you can capture a little bit by putting a partial investment in,
Mm-hmm.
and then you begin to see, oh my God, this really works. It might motivate you to put better investment in data, standards, managing it, doing digital analytics, getting companies like Tag One to come in to really refine their process to become even better. But if you just know it's a big cost suck and time suck,
Right.
I'm not going to do it.
Exactly. If that's your perception, then it just seems overwhelming for sure. Yeah.
Well, if we can kind of partial it, it's like, what
Hmm.
does good look like?
That's
So
right.
that those small companies can jump on board and do the good. What does the better look like? So those companies, those large companies that are refrained to do it because they have such old legacy systems, they could start thinking, okay, we can just refine our legacy systems. And then what's best look like?
Yep.
So if really we want to be the cutting edge and you want those premier customer relationships who are demanding it, you know exactly where you need to go.
You and I have actually talked about this in the past about where I may talk to somebody. I'm like, hey, we, help with traceability. We're a traceability management system, and this is what we do. They're like, oh, we do traceability. Well, define traceability. And so our little brainchild is like, let's have the levels or phases of traceability. Like you said, here's, phase 1 versus phase 5. And this one is seed to sale, and you're tracking everything, and maybe public or maybe private, whatever it may be. And phase 1 is let's say maybe like what the FDA is going to mandate for different food and herbal companies, which is, one level up, one level down, basics. Hey, you're scratching the itch, and that way, if there's some sort of outbreak, hopefully we can figure out, when and where it started, that type of thing. Um, so I totally agree that we've got to define. We talk about traceability, but what is it exactly, and how can we build that in? So the language is such a nuanced thing,
Well, and one of the things I tell people, I said, stop and think of yourself not as a business person, but as
Mhm.
just a consumer, as a family member. When you go to the grocery store and you buy, a bag of apples, what do? You scan them.
Yep.
What do you do when you go to a grocery or go to a restaurant nowadays, particularly post-pandemic?
Yeah.
You put your phone on the QR code that's sitting on your table.
Yep.
You scan it. And what happens when you order a pizza, better yet, Thai, Chinese,
Mm-hmm.
and the guy gives you a scanner and you write your name on it?
Mm-hmm.
You scan, you scan, you scan. It's just who we are now as a people. This is where we are and have and continue to evolve. So why is it that people are exchanging PDF files? If this is your customer base, this is what consumers are doing, scanning and sharing information digitally.
Yep.
Why are we talking about PDF files?
Right. 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 I've heard some people say, well, like, oh, like we don't know what the ROI is, that type of thing. It's like the investment is so low just to be able to share your story and from that component. And why do people spend, I don't know what the number is for the Super Bowl ads, whether it's 2 million or $4 million for a 30-second ad? It's not because you get 30 seconds on a show that, people are kind of half watching. It's the PR that you get about having a commercial on that 30 seconds, that when people have actually started to run the numbers, say, wow, we're on every single newspaper listed on about ads that are in here. The value of that is what it is. So coming back, like you talked about the risk mitigation, right? So the legal team saying, hey, we're going to have quick response to recalls, and which means, less this, and less class action suits. That's all good. But on the marketing side, which is a hat that I wear, marketing and biz dev, hey, if you're a sales guy and you can tell your story and make an emotional connection with the person who wants to buy your product, either to a wholesaler or directly, is really nice. People's eyes light up. They feel good about what they're buying and willing to spend a little bit more. And on the marketing side, to build collateral around that. And how much easier is it if you're trying to get some PR to say, hey, we've got this great story and we're using
Oh, I'm totally.
biodynamics and doing this, and people are going to eat that up and write about it, versus like, oh yeah, we're a commodity, and we're just looking
I
for
am.
best margins. Yeah.
I am totally with you. I live out near a winery, and I was out walking past the winery, just kind of looking at the grapes. And then lo and behold, I came upon the owner, and he told me about his QR code. And
Mm-hmm.
sure enough, I went back and I looked at the story. I went and bought myself a case of the wine. Just okay, he's a neighbor.
Yep.
But when you see the story that's in the QR code, when you hear the traceability journey that companies go to, these are really compelling stories. I mean, we've seen it in the seafood industry.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen it in one sector that's really taking it up is spices. They know that they're getting spices from all over the world. They need to be cleaned up. You need
Yep.
to know the authenticity of those products better than ever. And yet in that story, is some really fascinating details that are compelling enough to consumers. And yes, you're having a discriminating consumer who wants more spices and wants to know where they come from, more their wine, their seafood, and they want to know not only is it an interesting story, but with traceability, you can talk to the authenticity, the safety, and the integrity. I feel better about the products that I'm buying.
Yep. And you know, circle back to a point you made before, which is about in organizations, and it's easy for us to in our workforce to just like, hey, I go in, I do my job, and then I go home. But no longer, I mean, you know, companies we're not siloed anymore. If you have a good product, you have happy customers, they tell people, they post it on social media, and then you get more sales, and it makes life easier. So in this case, you know, specifically how marketing connects with your operations and supply chain is absolutely critical. On that side, what would your recommendation be to, say, a produce company, to some of the produce companies that are on the traceability list, like leafy greens or sprouts or red onions or herbs, whose margins are really tight, right? So, and it's hard to differentiate yourself. When I go to the store, I don't be like, hey, today I'm going to buy, you know, you know, Bob's Farms lettuce. Like I just like I want red leaf lettuce. And I'll probably look and I'll say organic is maybe only 50 cents or $1 more. I'll buy it, or it's $3 more. Maybe I won't buy it because it just seems a little excessive for whatever the price is. Like, what would your recommendation be to a produce company? We've talked to many produce companies, and they know that with the new era of smarter food safety, we'll talk about that there's going to have to do some basics, but they're like, we want to do the minimum. You know, like we just want to check the box. How do we help them like appreciate the impact when their margins are pretty tight and to realize there needs to be some change?
I think it's a fairly straight story for me.
Mm-hmm.
An orange is an orange is an orange is an orange. I'm gonna buy an orange.
Mm-hmm.
But if you tell me that that orange producer invested a little bit more to make sure that the oranges were safer,
Mm-hmm.
and that in the process of making them safer, there was a compelling storyline that how they planted the orange groves, 100 years ago. It's like, wow, I feel more familiar and comfortable. And we're only talking a matter of pennies here. But if through traceability, you distinguish your orange, you tell a compelling story, you comply with regulatory, and you hit the consumer mark, you just got the sale with probably a few extra pennies, and you covered your regulatory costs at the same time.
Yep.
I'm more inclined. We're not talking about the difference between $10,000 and $50,000 in a new building or a new car. We're talking pennies across a massive market, and I think consumers will doing this kind of traceability and showing the provenance, the origins of where these products came from, makes people feel more of an ownership and more empowered in their purchases, even if those purchases are only pennies of difference. So like I said, if you cover your regulatory costs and you distinguish yourself, and on top of it, the system that you put in place is so impressive that it gets you a premier customer relationship with your top customers,
Mm-hmm.
that's a win-win, win-win, win-win.
Yep. And how much responsibility, because a thought popped in my head, how much responsibility do the grocers and retailers have in telling that story too, and say, hey, we're going to source from companies that are doing best practices and help them tell their story? Because at the end, people are coming to Giant, Food Lion, Publix,
Well, no,
etc.
I think that's exactly it. I think,
Yeah.
again, we have seen a shift away from the big to the novel, to the
Mm-hmm.
curious, to the compelling.
Yep.
And retailers are seeing that those products move off the shelf quicker,
Mm-hmm.
with greater value and profit margins. And the consumers feel better for them. And retailers want to be a part of their community. And if they're resonating with their consumers in that way, I think that's exactly the route to go. But at the end of the day, let's not fool ourselves. You've got wholesalers, distributors who just don't want to do this. Just
Yep.
move the product
Mm.
in and out of the product,
Yep.
or in and out of the warehouse. I don't have time for this.
It's change is hard. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And my attitude is, okay, but you do know that there are other warehouses that will make that investment for pennies,
Mm-hmm.
pennies. And when that product shift goes, that product that customer business is lost forever.
Yep.
Be thinking very wisely of what, not just yourselves, but how you enable your customers to do greater things that make that relationship more long-serving and profitable for you, but also, have an eye to the future and to where the market's going.
I think about, Dave's whole grain bread. So they weren't on the shelf 2 to 3 years ago, or at least I wasn't paying attention to it. Now I try to reduce my glutens and buy things like whole grain bread, like to spoil myself with the eggs on Saturday morning. So first I remember them having, like this much shelf space, right? And now you go back and they have this much shelf space. And now what do you see? All the big brands copying 21 grains also. They're late to the game, right? And so now this little bread company is starting to take over and get a significant shelf space. And you see that with other gluten-free products that weren't there before. So, if larger brands aren't paying attention to pivoting and doing what's hard now, because we've always done, like, one of the words that drive me crazy of like, well, we've always done it this way is such, in today's era, is such a bad answer. Fine, then you're going to wait to do it when you're forced to do it and it's painful, or you're being threatened, and sometimes it's too late.
Well, I actually think, what you're saying, I mean, is what I'm saying. Big is not necessarily better.
Right.
The more compelling, the more personal actually comes from the small, the novel. And, you can act and be both. And the question is can you respond to those nuances in the marketplaces? And right now, we are seeing the biggest shift in consumer trends in 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be cost, convenience, and quality that would secure you that sale. And it was that way for a year, 10 years. And people say, well, these are trends. It's like, no, this is a generational change.
That's right.
Consumers are no longer buying products solely based on cost, convenience, and quality. That's the baseline. They expect that.
Yep.
What the majority of consumers across age brackets, gender, race, region, and geography, across all of America, is that they want to know the provenance. They want to know where the products come from, what natural ingredients are used, where is it being sourced from? Is it being sourced in the United States or outside of the United States?
Mm-hmm.
Is it sourced from natural or unnatural? Is it fair trade practices? Are there ethical practices? Because people are more concerned. They have a more discretionary purchases in mind. They have the pennies to make the difference, and they will.
That's awesome. Let's pivot for a second and talk a little bit about CBD.
Yeah.
So how did you stumble upon this CBD world, and what drives your passion? And tell us a little bit about some of the initiatives you've taken.
I think two things. One, originally some friends had approached, or some clients approached me on CBD. They said, you have a knack of really dealing with these complex issues,
Mm-hmm.
biotech, nanotech, global trade barriers, supply chain issues. You seem to figure this out, and you seem to have a great relationship with the folks at FDA, which frankly was quite flattering.
Mm-hmm.
It really was.
Mm-hmm.
But I had not even seen CBD on my horizon until my son, who is a 2-time cancer survivor, told me, Mom, it works.
Mm-hmm.
I can use opioids or I can use CBD.
That's right.
And the next thing I'm thinking, oh my God. And the more I learned about it, I just was so impressed and more flummoxed with why we can't seem to figure this issue out.
Yep.
So a variety of senior food industry executives, large and small, very credentialed, came to me and said, let's go at this.
Mm-hmm.
And we created what was called the Hemp and Cannabinoid Science Institute. And the idea was for industry to step to the plate. And we know that states are opening up and looking at both cannabis and CBD products. Fine, but at the end of the day, you can't move those products across the markets. My attitude is let those small businesses continue to flourish, but we've got to figure out a fix here, because if we don't, we're going to see a black market, and we don't want that.
Yeah, I agree. And I discovered it from a different path when you and I were talking before we started recording, where one of our clients and a friend of mine, James Brobin, I've been wanting to connect to you guys, and he's a Purple Heart recipient and a veteran, Marine veteran, and he got into it for the same reason, but to support veterans. Like, hey, we're dishing out opioids to veterans all day long who end up in a really bad state. Like, why aren't we using medicinal cannabis and CBD as a better alternative, is a major driver. for him, and to hear that story, it's like, oh, I didn't even know what CBD was probably 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Now, compared to most people, you could probably these days you can be an expert on anything, but I feel like I know the market pretty well. And hear Michael Mowdy, who was a Penn State grad and NFL player, say this changed my life. The NFL was prescribing me ibuprofen and pain medications that destroyed my digestive system, and here's this other solution that helped me. And why this still hasn't been signed off on by the FDA just seems very complicated and messy. Doesn't make much sense.
Well, and I think that's it. One of the things I say, this is a botanical that has been out there since Kingdom Come.
That's right.
We've learned how to deal with tobacco. We've learned how to deal with other botanicals.
Sugar,
yeah. So the question then becomes is we have legal paradigms that just don't work here.
Yeah.
However, it is irresponsible for industry broadly and for consumers to just say, well, we'll wait for Congress or we'll wait for FDA. The effort that I was trying to lead, and I continue and very passionate about, is let's create the data now. Let's go start sharing our data anonymously on a company level and create a database so that when the time does come and FDA says, okay, give me your applications, we're ready to go.
Yep.
Well, we know exactly the kind of information FDA wants, and I'm actually ready to say, let's pull together companies and do that application, knowing full well it's going to fail. But once we figure out how it fails, we know exactly the answers that we need to go pursue. So let's go pursue failure with the long-term view of towards success.
I like that. And what's interesting too, this is one of the few issues in Congress that is pretty bipartisan. You get the senator in Kentucky and the senator of Oregon and Washington, California, and Colorado all working together. That's pretty rare. So there certainly is something substantive and interesting about it. And it's really, started to go, branch all generations, where I'd say 10 years ago, anything stemming from cannabis would have been taboo to probably 75% of the population. And now I talk to my parents, who I'd say are pretty conservative folks, about it all the time, and they're all on board. And my mom just had surgery on her hand, and she's talked to me more. I'm taking this. I think it's helping, And
but I also think, getting back to the topic that you and I love so passionately about, it's a botanical. We don't know where it's coming from. We don't know how it was raised. We don't know, how much psychotropic, psychedelic elements. And so, you got to track and trace it, so to make sure that it's not, synthetic and, poorly produced and
that's right,
very dangerous.
Yep.
So this is one of those areas that I actually think that once again, industry would do itself the benefit of, as this industry continues to develop, from the smallest companies to the large, put tracking and tracing systems in place to not only assure themselves that their product is safe, but that their customers will safe. And one day FDA will be asking for it as well. I don't think there's a question in my mind that we have to do that.
No, it's an absolutely, very smart point. And we talked about this with Kim Stuck on the podcast too. And she does GMP consulting for cannabis and CBD companies. And she used to work in the Denver County, and she's like, the things that I would see these cannabis and CBD companies doing, using the wrong pesticides and using the wrong packaging, like we do full recalls on everything. So, the main reason I think we're starting to see legalization of different industries that, you could call them, whether you want to call them, kind of sin, whether it's gambling or cannabis or whatever, which is, the devil is better than the one you don't, and it's regulated. By the way, it's taxed, which is always good too. And there's visibility on it, at least they're being done the right way. But in this case, we're talking about CBD, which is, at least as far as I've seen, there haven't been any real negative downsides, certainly compared to things like tobacco.
No, I always say to my children and to my clients, harness the benefits, manage the risks.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless if someone's watching, whether it's mom or the government, harness the benefits, enjoy it for what it is, but be prepared to know where the risks are so I'm not cleaning them up after you. Harness the benefit. And here's a clear case with CBD that there are benefits, but we also know that it's a nascent industry, that there are some risks.
Yeah.
Let's understand them. And frankly, you and I've talked as well. I'm working with a consortium of retailers developing GMPs. And so on CBD, we're talking some very large entities. And when I say that, wink, wink, you know who I'm talking about. And they want to sell these products, and they want to sell them from the small companies and have confidence that those products are safe, and the big ones. And they will ultimately be asked by FDA and USDA, are they in fact safe? So if we don't have those GMPs, they're doing the right thing. So whether it's the GMPs, it's this database, creating the regulatory submissions, anybody who's involved in this area, you know, Joe, send them my way and let's work together on this.
Love it. That sounds good. So we're going to go to something I call the transparent 10. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but I'm going to throw some fast questions at you. You got to come with the first thing that comes back to your head. It's really just to get to know Karil better.
Okay.
And it's a lot of fun, and there's no right or wrong answer, which is good. So the first question, your most proud achievement, don't tell me about your kids and your husband, because we know that counts. So what's your most proud achievement?
Representing the industry on a national, international basis and bringing the voices together in a harmonized way to do things collaboratively. It really has been a joy representing the industry.
Something you love to do.
Hike, climb, be outside.
There you go. Something you hate to do.
I don't know. It's always new and different, so I'm not sure I know hate. That's a hard one. I'm sorry.
Dishes, dust, there must be something you don't like to do.
I sing when I do the dishes.
You're like Mary Poppins? Are you telling me you got Mary Poppins on the line here?
Yes, you got Mary Poppins on the line. What can I say?
What's your guilty pleasure?
Oh, ice cream. Ice cream.
Nice. What flavor?
Every flavor. Try to keep push the envelope with Baskin Robbins. Yeah. I think the other one is I really love learning about technology. I'm clearly above 30, but every time somebody introduces me to a new aspect of technology, I am stunned at its capacity to go and do things in a different way. Somebody said, why are we still calling the smartphones phones? They're not phones, they're calculators, they're maps. That's right. And for somebody like myself and maybe yourself that has seen this evolution in this one little tool, I think constantly being on the cutting edge and doing some fascinating things, I think curiosity drives me all the time.
I realize there's a heck of a lot of people out there who are way smarter than I am. So
yes.
Favorite band?
Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. Yeah.
Favorite movie?
Lawrence of Arabia.
Favorite vacation?
Spain and Andalusia.
Something you suck at in business?
Diplomacy and politics.
I think you're great. I just love your direct approach.
I think people appreciate my candor, and when you're talking science, candor is good. But when you get a lot of people in a room, diplomacy, I think I could have a little bit more dose of diplomacy.
Something you're great at in business?
Bringing people together and creating linkages.
There you go.
The world has become so siloed because of the nature of our lives, whether it's inside corporations and families, that when you say, my world, I've always looked across the industry. I've always had a horizontal view. And I said, Joe, do you know that you're doing the exact same thing as someone else is doing? We should create a collaboration.
Yep.
Or do you know that? And because I have a horizontal view of the world, in a way that most people are siloed and vertical, people are always saying, you look at the world differently. And I've come to realize, I think I do.
Yeah, that's cool. I realize it too.
Creating those linkages of opportunity and new joys.
And maybe this piggybacks this, but so like the last question is like, what's your big vision for the food industry?
Our lives are so busy and accelerated that consumers can barely take care of their own nutrition and health.
Mm-hmm.
They know they need to rely on more information from the food industry for better products, more healthy products. And I think we've come to a point in the marketplace where the food industry does a phenomenal job putting new, different, novel products on the shelf. Can we evolve to a different food system that creates healthy, nutritious food for all consumers, where we are not significantly overweight or having non-communicable diseases like cancer,
Yep.
heart disease, and this other? I really do believe in the goodness of the industry. It's not always what people want,
Mm-hmm.
but when you create these linkages, you can do good things. And I think the next challenge for this industry that produces amazing amounts of food and novel products is to push itself to do the right in terms of new, nutritious, and healthy foods. So we
Love
can
it.
eliminate nutrition or the obesity and heart issues that we've got.
Absolutely. Karil, it's been an absolute pleasure. I feel like we could do this all afternoon, and in a week we will do it all afternoon when we get to see you. And to our listeners joining us today, thank you for joining us. And thanks to Tag One for their support, and stay transparent, everybody.
Thank you.